Hello and welcome to another episode of The Listening Room. I am Drew Didle, a family doctor who has a real interest in holistic and integrative health, and I've taken a strong interest in the Robert F. Kennedy Jr. campaign. And today we have Andrew Granger, who I have met. We actually met at a campaign rally, which we might share a little bit more later on, but we are going to chat today a little bit more about the candidate, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and his campaign and kind of Andrew's role in that. So, Andrew, thanks for being here. If you want to introduce yourself a little bit to listeners.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name's Andrew Granger. Happy to be here with Drew, talking about Kennedy. Yeah.
Awesome. So, maybe just start at the beginning. When did you kind of first become aware of this candidate and his campaign?
It had to be probably about November of last year, 2023. I think when he was making it known that he was intending to run. And I think I really became aware of it when it became very clear that the Democratic Party had no interest in being any part of him. Being any part of his campaign, sponsoring him, etc. And when he decided announce his that he was going to be independent, and that's when I really was like started paying attention to him. I didn't really know much about him before that, and I started paying attention at that time. And the more I learned, the more excited I got.
Yeah, from what I've seen, one of the kind of the hallmarks of this campaign and sometimes other independent campaigns is they don't get much mainstream coverage or fair mainstream coverage. And so, it seems that spaces like Twitter, spaces like blogs or, Substack articles are really where you can find a lot of information about candidates like Kennedy, and also like independent podcasts. I know maybe some people have seen him on Joe Rogan or there's a number of interviews that he's done. Um, but what I wanted to ask about is um, uh, what I guess what are some of the places where you've seen and heard about his message?
Yeah, well, I think that's putting it mildly to say that the mainstream media is mild, like not really covering him in a favorable way. I mean, I pretty much don't consume mainstream media except peripherally, like because it's all around, in the spaces that I inhabit and live in. Like I constantly come into contact with it, but I don't seek it out. I don't sit down for the programming. But the stuff that I do come across that mentions Kennedy is just there's a very strong attempt to marginalize him. And I think that because of that, he's definitely his only way to be exposed to people like me and people in general is, as you said, through Instagram, through X, through YouTube, through podcasts. He's done a great job of getting himself out there on podcasts. And I learned a lot about him through podcasts such as the Joe Rogan Experience and others. And recently he's been on Bussin' with the Boys and many other podcasts. He's kind of been doing a tour. And yeah, it was through those clips that I began to get acquainted with him in a sort of like titrated way, like just casually. The algorithm would feed me stuff and I would also seek it out. And yeah, I think that most of my information has come from these third-party media sources, but like these internet media, not mainstream media. So all the sites that I just mentioned.
Yeah. And I will say, you and I are both here in Minnesota, and I've been
Mhm.
waiting for the day that he comes for a visit.
Hmm.
The closest that he came that I was aware of was a few months ago. There was an event in Des Moines, Iowa. It was a one-day convention that was used to help get his name on the ballot in the state of Iowa. And I saw you in the crowd there. And do you want to share a little bit about what you were up to on that day?
Sure. So I I made some Kennedy content on YouTube that kind of did pretty well compared to how things had been going on my page. Like I just have a new channel, and then I did a video that got about 10,000 views, and somebody from a super PAC had reached out to me, a super PAC for Kennedy, and we had some dialogue about creating content. And as sort of a trial, I went down to Des Moines, Iowa to cover the campaign as an independent reporter, which I did, and that's where I ran into Drew. And we happen to know each other because we're in Minneapolis and communities such as Dance Church and others. But yeah, we really kind of dropped in for a bit there and talked about Kennedy. And then I spent the day covering the event. I think I interviewed probably 10 or 12 different people, and it's all posted on YouTube. Maybe we'll post a link here to that video if people are curious. But yeah, I fully covered the event, and it was really fun just to kind of sit in to kind of be in the journalist's chair because I haven't really played that role very much in my life. I mean, I wrote for the student newspaper in college, but didn't really do much beyond that. And it was a really eye-opening. I had this experience of interviewing people outside and then going in later, watching the presentation, and then afterwards there is a press conference. And so I lined up with all these press reporters with my cell phone camera and my little like God, it's this thing. It's this little like cell phone camera holder, you know?
Sure.
So there's all these like, Fox is sending somebody, CBS, NBC, all the major media outlets and a bunch of minor ones too. I mean, there was like BBC Canada was there, local papers and radio stations. So all in all, there was maybe 20 media represented, and I was one of them. And it was a really fun experience. Like I kind of just be in that line of people. And what I realized, like through that experience, is that everyone was just shockingly hostile towards Kennedy. And he just sort of, it's like he knew he was going to be attacked as soon as he stood up there. He's like, all right, I'm ready to receive whatever this is. And I know that I'm going to have to like defend myself with my words against the way that I'm being presented and like that they're going to try and frame this. And I guess it's probably nothing he's a stranger to, but it was weird to witness the kind of hostility like take over the interviewers, the reporters. It was like they weren't even themselves. And that was really a trippy experience for me. And I got to kind of give them a question that was a bit different, and I was really happy with that. So yeah, that was kind of my experience down there in Iowa, and it was wonderful.
Do you remember what you asked him?
Oh yeah, what I asked him was, how do you plan to keep your connection to nature like during the hubbub and tumult of this campaign? And then there was sort of a moment where he was kind of pausing, like looking for more clarity, and I elaborated and said something along the lines of, I mean, I know from researching you that your nature is a very big part of what you're about and the environment, and I'm just wondering about how your connection to nature, how do you stay grounded during the tumult of a campaign? And like, how do you plan to stay grounded when you become president? And that was my question to him. And he liked it. He said so. So it was a fun moment for me.
Yeah. For me, one of my connections to the campaign is through Charles Eisenstein, who has been an advisor at times and is kind of a writer and a spiritual thinker. And
Mhm.
I listened to an interview between the two of them, Charles and Robert. And Charles made a comment about uh, something about him committing to meditate or committing to be in nature every day and this kind of groundedness, which really sets him apart as a political candidate.
Mhm.
And really, I think for me and for like a lot of people in my community is what helps us see him as a representative of us and our values. But coming back to that day in Iowa, I know that one of his priorities was to make sure that everyone there who wanted one had a chance to take a selfie with him.
Hmm.
I'm curious, did you get a picture?
No, I didn't really want to. I, yeah, I wanted to like just play the role that I had kind of chosen for myself at that time, which was
Yeah.
to be a reporter.
Be
And
on the backside of the camera.
yeah, I would, I've never really been one to seek out a selfie. I'm kind of, to be honest, camera shy and I don't have a problem with it, but I definitely don't seek it out.
Sure.
Yeah. So, I did not get a selfie with Robert. Did you?
I did, yeah, and it was a fun moment. Just, a brief chance to shake his hand. And I told him, a true story that my dad in 1968 had volunteered on his dad's campaign and for an event in Hastings, Nebraska. And so I think he appreciated that and, had to keep the line moving, but I had like my little window to meet him. And so that felt good.
You ever heard of a lady named Amma? You know what this
I do
is?
know about Amma.
She's the hugging saint, and
Yeah,
she'll do events where she hugs like 10,000, 12,000 people in one day. And it's nuts. I mean, she'll spend 16 hours hugging people and like they bring them to her in a line. And it was very reminiscent of that. Like it was sort of like everyone like gets in the line and like waits their turn and has their time and then like hands their camera to the security guy. And it's all very well orchestrated because at the end of the day, there's just one Amma, and everyone else has to support her hugging someone. And it's just like Robert Kennedy. He's just one man, and he can only shake so many hands. And so everyone has to be brought through in such a way that like that is optimized. And it was a really a kind of fun thing to witness and realize too. And uh man, I feel like, for Robert, there's got to be so many things tugging on his energy and awareness, and he's just got to stay really grounded as much as possible. And whatever excitement I might have felt at being in the same place and meeting somebody that I hope can be a leader for our country. Well, I mean, I know is a leader for our country, and I have high hopes for. Yeah, I'm not ready to. I just feel like, yeah, I didn't want to bug him. That was how I felt about it. I didn't want to bug him with whatever was going on with me. I wanted to just be like, all right, you do you. I'm here to record things. So, but
So
yeah, it's cool. It's got to be a lot being one of those guys who's in the spotlight all the time.
Yeah. So here we are in August, less than
Mhm.
100 days to the election. Um, and I think there's quite a bit of work to do in order for, kind of the idea of Kennedy winning, breaking into mainstream consciousness. And I think there's a lot that any individual like myself or yourself can do. I'm curious if you have any plans or any specifics as far as ways that you want to help spread the word about the campaign or things that, you'd like to be doing in the months ahead?
I've been feeling drawn to be involved, and I have been at a bit of a loss as to where to plug in. And I I haven't really done much regarding Kennedy like content creation since the Iowa thing that we saw each other at. And yeah, I guess I'm not sure what my role is in as things unfold, but I'm ready to step up I don't see something clear for me to do at this time. I guess what I'm drawn to is doing interviews, talking about like speaking my truth about why I feel he's relevant. So I guess sharing my own viewpoint and then seeing what others have to say. And I feel as though he's going to win and it's going to be a big surprise. And I think that it's just because there's this overlay of like this mass media and where, but beneath it, there's all of this awareness of who he is and what he's about. And it's because he's gone on podcasts and because he's been doing all this like underground self-promotion essentially. And I think that the awareness is really going to shock people in a wonderful way. I mean,
Mhm.
some people might not like it at first, but they're going to quickly realize that, oh, like, this is a good thing. And It's yeah, it's really, I think that like it speaks to the like the fact that there's so many efforts to marginalize him. I mean, for example, the latest thing in New York where they're trying to get him off the ballot, like sue so he's not in there. It's sort of like, and they didn't want him to be on the ballot, and he had to like go individually to every state and do like this like US, tour to get all these signatures and all this stuff. And the fact that it's been done in every state, that he's polling so well, that I think there's I mean the powers that be in like the ivory tower of like the upper echelons of politics in the US, they don't want to acknowledge what's happening. And the fact is that it's not about Robert. It's about him representing some sort of awakening consciousness in the people that live here. And and the fact that he resonates with us is a testament to that. And so there's this connection to nature, there's this connection to divinity, there's this idea of unity, there's this anti-war sentiment, there's this clean environment stuff, and there's this not um accepting or swallowing what's being pushed on us in the mainstream programming. And all of those things resonate with a ton of Americans, myself included. And so I just feel that I'm just really happy to be around during this time in this life. And it's what a wonderful opportunity we have to to watch this unfold and to take some agency and some ownership of it. And I think that there's just a real rude awakening for the powers that be that want to continue things the way that they're going, just allowing inflation to run away, war to continue, the middle class being gutted, property values going up, land being bought by corporations but like BlackRock. It's obscene what's being done, and somebody's here to speak the truth about it and change things. And the man's been doing it for 40 some years, and he cleaned up the Hudson River. He has an incredible track record. He wrote a book about Anthony Fauci, and he hasn't been sued for it. And the fact that they're like throwing everything they possibly can at this guy, it just, I mean, there have been like two like sketchy people with weapons like at his rallies already, and I mean, there's a Trump assassination attempt. I mean, there's so much brewing that that's kind of what happens when someone who's like clinging to power or clinging to something like realizes that there's a threat to it, and like they just start to go off the rails. And it's like this clinging that it's and like all the static that we're seeing is that. And so for me it's a beautiful sign, like, oh, like they recognize him as a threat, and like that just means he's all the more relevant, and that like this is real, and then we're gonna win. So yeah.
Yeah. I've also had, I guess you could say, visions of him winning, or I can imagine what it might be like as we draw closer to the election.
Well, I
Um,
haven't had visions. I just believe that.
yeah.
But if
Well,
you have
I'll
visions, I
just kind of describe what I mean, which is that, like, if on election day, we go to the polls and he has, either a winning number of votes or it's enough. I've heard some people speculate that, like, I don't exactly understand the details, but if it's contested and no one has the winning majority, then it goes to Congress, I think. But the
Mhm.
idea is there has to be, I think, kind of an obvious mass movement. And so I was thinking about, well, what can I do? And I was, looking around my backyard and thinking, well, if Kennedy's going to win in November, we're going to have big gatherings of people who are kind of sharing that enthusiasm. And it is an uphill battle at times. It can feel kind of like a roller coaster. Here in Minnesota, one of the CD leads, Henry, has been organizing these weekly walks around the lakes. And a week ago, we were at Lake Harriet, and about seven of us in Kennedy shirts, with signs.
Mhm.
And Tim Walz had just been announced as the VP pick for Harris. And honestly, quite a few people kind of gave us either scowls or, were looking down at us for supporting Kennedy. And there wasn't really an opening to really get into a conversation. Others did wave or smile or honk. But that really was kind of a pulse check of, right now, at least in that little neighborhood of Minnesota, there's a lot of people who maybe still aren't so favorable to the campaign. And, in some way, I think it's sort of obviously as a result of the news coverage around them and what they know. But for me, it points to how important it is for us to be visible and for us to be creating spaces where people can get the full story. I just wanted to share that about when I say vision, it's like I'm imagining in-person gatherings of people being a big part of how we spread the word and create openings for people to get more connected with what the campaign's really about.
Mhm.
Um, so coming back to another question for you, have you had any experience of wearing Kennedy t-shirt, wearing Kennedy hats, and had some reactions from the public?
No, no, I don't have any Kennedy swag yet. I need to get some.
Okay, we got to get
Yeah,
you hooked up. How
yeah.
about, have you ever had an experience of someone knowing that you're supporting Kennedy and they've had some either pushback or some antagonism for you?
I mean, I've had a few conversations that went that way, definitely. It's really, I guess, like all I do is speak my truth, and like if someone has a problem with it, like that's really their problem, you know. I'm not too put off by that, but it's weird. I had one conversation comes to mind. So I went to go get a piece of furniture from somebody on Craigslist, something like that. And somehow we ended up talking about politics. This is like a month and a half ago. And this guy was like a poli sci professor or something like that. And so he was really invested in, knowing a lot about what's going on. And we talked about it. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I really like Kennedy." And he was like, "Oh, I'm not gonna vote for him or this or that." And I was like, why not, dude? Like you like him. You like him more than these other options, you know? And he was someone who was like anyone but Trump. And it's like, okay, like why not Kennedy, you know? And he's like, "Oh, I don't know." And it's like, bro, like this option you're being presented with, like to oppose Trump is not a good one. Like and look, we just had this frank conversation, and basically what I was struck by was like he was in a state of kind of hopelessness, sort of about it, like, oh, it'll never happen. And it's just like, well, you just swallowed, the narrative that's being pushed like on the mainstream media. And like basically I have faith and belief and also some kind of inner knowing that like it's all going to work out. And I, yeah, like I just stand by it. I'm just like, listen, this is what's going to happen. And, like his position kind of softened later on. He's like, well, maybe. And I was like, all right, you do you, like at the end of the day, like I'm not trying to convince you of anything. Like I'm just sharing what I see. And like from a place of strength and understanding. And I think that basically like he was coming from a place of fear about it, and it's like he sort of knew better but wasn't willing to stand on his conscience about it. And there's all these mental gymnastics about why to not do that, but who cares? Like it's kind of meaningless. Like if there's what's the point of living in America, the lesser of two evils, like is this a country of cowardice, like what's the point? Do you want that? Like, is that what America's about? Isn't America supposed to be proud of like how free and strong and like exemplary morally that it is? Why not make the tough choice? And that's my message to anyone who's like kind of wavering. It's like, listen, if this is what your conscience says, but you're not going to do it because you're afraid of some tactical thing, listen, like you're not doing your country any favors. You're not.
Yeah.
You're,
I
you're
want
coming from
to
a place of hopelessness. I mean, I don't want, you know, I want people to vote their conscience, but I don't want someone to be afraid to vote their conscience. I think that's unfortunate, and I would speak out against that. And I think that's what's happening with, I don't know, a lot of people, that's an American political thing. It's very common. Every year there's some third party candidate that's attractive to people, and they're like, "Oh, I'd vote Green Party, but I can't really. I guess take votes away from this person." It's that like that's the whole narrative. I mean, this is all a circus show. Those guys, Trump, I think he was an outsider before. Now he's not, and I think it was a shock when Trump got elected. It was like, wow, how would they allow that to happen? I'm so surprised because for sure Hillary was the Manchurian candidate in 2016. But I mean, now he's a known entity. They know how he works. There's fixers. He's corrupt. He's corruptible, and the Democratic Party and leadership is no different, sadly. And this is definitely the only real option like that has any integrity. So yeah, if you want to have integrity, you want to vote your heart, you know what to do. You don't need me to tell you.
I have a little description of kind of how I see it, and then I'm going to turn it back to you for kind of a final comment, and I think we'll wrap up in a few moments here. But from my perspective, I think the media does, and it's more than just the TV shows or the TV programs or the print media, but the whole apparatus around it is basically pushing people into one of two perspectives. And they kind of know their demographics that a lot of people are going to be sympathetic with the Democrats, and they are at this point kind of rallying around Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, and they're
Divide and conquer.
the fear of Trump, and they tack on labels of um, you know of all sorts of moral reasons why Trump would be so bad and why you have to support that side. And a lot, even local papers, I see the really heavy bias in the direction of that's the only choice. And I think for a lot of the media that I don't see as much living in Minneapolis and living in more progressive circles, but I know in rural areas, I was just driving through the Driftless region and you saw Trump signs, you saw homemade Trump displays. There's a lot of, it's the other side of the coin, the divide and conquer, which is, they will point fingers and blame Tim Walz for, during the pandemic, the some of the monitoring programs or the riots, after George Floyd's death, or also things like the transgender issues, LGBTQ things. It's that in rural America kind of reads the other way, and so they are being divided and conquered. And so if you are kind of superficially tracking the media, you're presented with those two options. And then what I see is in the middle for people who, either are friends with us or, they hang out at some of the same types of music events or, kind of rooted but spiritual communities. We kind of see through the filters and we understand that this is an environmental lawyer who has been working against corporations to defend our environment, to fight against the pharmaceutical industry and so forth in a way that really substantially challenges the powers that be in the way that his father, was challenging the powers that be and was ultimately assassinated, to bring an end to his presidential run, and his uncle was killed in office. So, when you kind of study in between the lines and know what's really going on, and you kind of have that aha moment, and then you find your community. We find ourselves in the middle of this thing, not on the left or the right, but just in the truth. And that community, it maybe grows slowly because people really have to kind of do their homework and kind of filter out, the criticisms or the things they're hearing in the mainstream. But that it'll grow and grow and grow until we reach a critical mass, and then it'll be all in. And if that moment happens before the election day, I don't think it'll be close. We might have a landslide, and that's what I'm trying to spread the word about. And sometimes it feels like it reaches a difficult audience because people, they haven't had that aha moment yet. But I think by recording podcasts, by making art, by writing songs, all the ways that we can, share what we see, that makes it a little bit easier for people to connect with what's going on with this movement. So that's how I see it. Is there more you want to share before we wrap up this interview, Andrew?
Yeah. You hit on something that made me remember something that occurred to me a few months ago. And that is that like the apparent obstacle is actually the way forward. And that's something that I just learned applies in many areas of life, if not all areas of life. But the thing that you think you don't want to deal with, but is real, that's the most important thing to pay attention to, because that is actually going to be the stepping stone to the next level for you, like once you get over it and master it. So I'll give an example from Kennedy's campaign. Uh, they wanted him off the ballot. They didn't want him on the ballot at all. Like, your name's not going to be next to Trump's name and Biden's name. Now it's not even Biden's name. But your name's not going to be next to these two Republican and Democratic candidates, like as another third option, because that, like the accessibility of that is something they did not want to have happen. And by they, I just mean the political the political powers that be that want to stay in power and remain that way. And so they just they were like they shut it down. But the Kennedy campaign saw that as an opportunity, and they went out to all 50 states, mobilized volunteers, mobilized the common man to go out and get the signatures required in every state to be put on the ballot. And in some states it was super easy, it was as simple as asking. In other states it's monumentally difficult and has never been done. And it's at the point where it's been done in every single state, and New York has enough signatures. They're just fighting it because that's they're trying to get them on a legal technicality, and it's not going to happen. But it's incredible because what it seems like a problem, it seems like, oh, this would totally derail the Kennedy campaign, actually empowers it. Once they view it in the sense of like, oh, this obstacle is actually an opportunity for us to promote ourselves in all 50 states, to show our grassroots strength, and to mobilize hundreds of thousands of volunteers. And it's done all of these things, and it's shown the viability before, even like months before election day, like, hey, guess what? This is a fait accompli. Like, we've done this. And it's sort of like in attacking like someone who's aligned with that reality, of like viewing the obstacle as an opportunity and staying present with what's real. Like, these attackers are playing themselves, and it's just, I don't know. To me, it's becoming more and more apparent. And so I would want to lead people with that, like the apparent obstacles, not just in the campaign, but in the broader spectrum of life. Those are the opportunities.
Very well said. Andrew, I want to thank you for your time today. And also for our listeners, thanks for tuning into the conversation. Um, Glad to have you here. And that's it for now.
Thanks, Drew.